Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I'm about to feed a couple of the containers that I have my nightcrawlers in. Over here, the VERMIBAG Mini is where I keep my European nightcrawlers. That's a continuous flow-through type style system, and here in this small tub is where I keep my African nightcrawlers. It's been 10 days since these bins were fed, so I'm going to go ahead and apply today's feeding, and while I'm at it, I'm just going to let the camera roll. Maybe we'll get a chance to spot a few worms in the process. Alright, let's get started. So if you've been following along, one of the things I've been challenged with lately in this VERMIBAG Mini, where the European nightcrawlers are, is flying insects. I don't know if they're gnats, fruit flies, some sort of a tiny flying insect that's been making their home in here in pursuit of the food, I presume. Can't imagine why else. And I've been trying different things, burying the food. I've been trying to sink it lower, put a lot of bedding on top. I even put some diatomaceous earth onto the cardboard that covers the contents of the bin, and that's just a material that's supposed to kill insects, and it seems like that was actually doing a little bit of a benefit and steering things in the right direction. But after 10 days, I'm curious to see how things are progressing in here. I haven't looked in here since then, so I'm going to get the camera a little bit closer so we can see what's happening when we open the bin. Well, I'm still seeing a few flying insects. I don't know, maybe not quite as many as I was expecting. The one telltale that we saw last time was that there were a fair number of insect carcasses on this cardboard, and we see more of the same now. I guess now that we've lifted off the covering, now we can even see more of them cruising around. You might be able to see. I don't know if the camera's going to show it or not. And here's the layer of diatomaceous earth that was spread over the cardboard that's covering things up here. And in certain places, like over here, you can see over here as well, mixed in with the diatomaceous earth, you can see insects that have perished within the material. So to a certain degree, I assume it's helping. I don't know if I can really rate it relative to previous occurrences as far as the number of insects, but it does almost seem as if we've got fewer insects in here. And these bugs might just be attestable to the fact that, you know, for some time now we've been dealing with this, and maybe it's just going to require a little bit more time. I don't know. We'll see. If things don't turn around here soon, I might step up the efforts to try to knock these guys out once and for all. But for now, I think we're just going to proceed as is. Again, let me get a little bit closer so we can better see what we're doing here while we feed. The plastic covering the material is intended to help recirculate moisture within the bin, because this being a fabric bag, over the winter at least, when the air was very dry, it did seem like there was a tendency of the bin to dry out a little bit, as with all my bins, and the plastic has been helping a lot. We've got a lot more leaf cover on here than we've had in recent times. In recent times, up until the most recent feeding, I was always simply placing the food on top, not looking to bury it. And I wonder if that could have contributed to the influx of insects by having food right there on top. You get that reaction from me once in a while when I look in this bin, because I'm kind of a red wiggler guy. Red wigglers are much smaller size worms than the European nightcrawlers. And, you know, this worm right here has got to be at least twice the size of a red wiggler in terms of girth. Red wigglers can grow just as long, but certainly not as thick as this, I don't think. Look at this little guy over here. I don't know if he's visible. He was trying to crawl up the wall of the container. Just checking to see if I can spot any signs of the previous feeding. It's been 10 days since this bin was last fed. So far I don't see any signs of it, but we did actually resume last week, or 10 days ago when we last fed. We did actually return to actually trying to submerge the food under the level of the bin rather than throwing the food right on top as I'd been doing previously. So the food that we placed in here might be a little bit lower. We're starting to see signs of the food. It might be the layer that we're at now, which is where we've got a couple mango seeds. This mango seed here was cut, so both of its two ends were hacked off, revealing the insides of the mango seed. Big worm hanging out of it. Look at those crazy stripes. What a design. Such a cool looking worm. I usually don't really get all into individual worms. I'm usually kind of jazzed when I see a huge pile of worms hanging out together. Individual worms usually don't interest me, but in this bin I always get sidetracked just because I'm unaccustomed to seeing such large creatures in my wormery. But yeah, I guess the whole idea here was to provide the worms access to the inside of the mango seed to help spur on its decomposition, and by giving them access, I have to assume that it helps. These whole mango seeds were actually also punctured in order to allow infiltration too, perhaps not as easily as the ones that were hacked in half. But you can see I can crack it with my hand. If you ever handled one of these things, you'll know that that's almost impossible to do if it's just been removed from the mango. So it's working its way down. It's getting there gradually. Here and there, some of these larger chunks that I'm locating now are actually the ends of the mango seed that had been cut off. There should be another one around here too somewhere. But that's not of great interest. All I want to do is get this feeding taken care of and let these little guys get back to work. But it's always fun to check out how things are progressing down within the material, especially since we've now given ourselves license to dig again. Because for many months it was a top feeding only situation here. And I paid close attention to not allowing myself to probe down into the material very much. But since I've released myself from that restriction, now we can actually probe down a little bit deeper and see how things look. You can see we've got a good dense worm population. As I work my way down, I can feel the material does definitely have a nice moisture level to it, and it is teeming with worms. Some of them quite large in size, that's for sure. What is this? This feels like a fairly large item. Okay, it just has something attached to it, a little bit stuck to it. This, if I'm not mistaken, corn cob. Corn cobs take forever. I don't know why, but I don't want stuff that low in my bin, because since it is a flow-through container, at some point the material in the bin will have to get harvested, and when you harvest a container like this, you simply drop the finished castings out the bottom. So I would not want to have all kinds of uncomposted materials falling out when we finally get around to harvesting. If I can probe down and locate things like that, I'm always going to try to bring them closer to the surface to try to promote ongoing consumption of the material. And now all I'm really doing is trying to just aerate the fairly dense material I'm sensing around the perimeter. In this container, like I've been doing in my other containers, I'm now going to try to aerate and agitate the material to help promote airflow and also just loosen the material a little bit to make it easier for the worms to come and go through the material. But I really like the way this looks. Really nice stuff as you work your way down lower. Nice and densely populated with worms doing their thing, breaking it all down. So why don't we proceed with giving them their meal. I have my box of fresh leaves that we can use to coat the top of the container with, so why don't we recycle some of this stuff that's been in the bin for a while now. Drop in a little bit of leafy matter, stuff that's already had a chance to break down a little bit over time. Lay that down as their carbon food source. Maybe by being on the surface it was a little bit less interesting for them. Maybe by being down lower, maybe it's more easily accessible. And then we're going to start adding some of their food. We've got a, what is this? Part of a peach, part of a watermelon. They're stuck together, frozen together. Here we have a banana peel. This is an avocado, part of an avocado. That should be pretty popular. Nice big chunk of food there. Ooh. I also have here some old noodles, which we'll give them to see how they enjoy that. And that's a nice big hunk of cantaloupe melon. That's a pretty nice, diverse food selection to give them. We'll drop on a little bit of pulverized eggshell here as grit. And then I'll also put some coffee on top in the hopes of suppressing any sort of delicious odors. Again, hopefully to limit the attractiveness of this container to the flying insects that seem to have taken an interest in this. That's pretty cool. Even out on the edges, it seems like we're pretty good on the dryness. I was attesting to the dryness in this container to the fact that there's fabric against the material, possibly allowing for the escape of the moisture, but luckily that's not the case here. Maybe that was more of a thing to worry about in the winter when it's really dry. The air is really dry. Now that it's summertime and humid, might not be as much of an issue. Oh yeah, we got some of these old food. Put the corn back down there. Some of these mango seeds that we had, put them all back down there too. So we'll make sure our food is below the surface. Try to keep the flying insects from being so curious about what the heck is in here. Give the whole thing a little bit of an agitation too. It's a really nice setup in here, you know. The worms are doing a great job. The material's looking really good. The worms definitely look happy and healthy and growing big in size. So to top off, I'm just going to drop in a couple handfuls of leafy matter. Maybe try to pull these sticks out too. Looks like my leaf blower vac is pretty strong. It even picks up sticks. Now we can begin restoring things to the way we found them when we got in here. So I'm going to continue, as I had been, using this diatomaceous earth as one way to try to knock out the invading insects. Yeah, we'll just keep our fingers crossed. Okay, on to the African nightcrawlers. So alongside my African nightcrawlers, I've got this yellow tub in which I've got some leftover uncomposted materials which were captured as part of the screening process when I harvested the container that these worms were in last. And I just didn't have room to reintegrate the material into their new bin when I originally built it. And I've been steadily phasing it back into their environment over time. And I've only got a little bit left, and this is going to go today. So as part of their feeding, they're also receiving the old materials that they used to have once upon a time in their previous bin. So that'll just complement their bedding that they're getting today. If they even need fresh bedding, this might just be enough to serve the purpose of bedding. Unfortunately here too, I'm seeing some flying insects, and it's so weird. It's just nightcrawlers only for some reason. Could it just be that nightcrawlers attract flying insects and the red wigglers don't? None of my other worm bins, which are all red wigglers, exhibit the presence of flying insects. Only my nightcrawler bins for some reason. So unusual. And I've been steadily phasing out the plastic coverings on my worm bins because the moisture levels in all of my worm bins has been steadily rising as the humidity in the air increases during the hot and humid summer. I'm definitely going to miss having this plastic over the top of the bin because I always really enjoy seeing how the material looks once you remove the plastic. They're drawn to the moisture that tries to evaporate and then condenses on the plastic. And I don't know if they're pulling it right off the plastic. I would have to assume so. Taking the little water droplets right off the plastic and enjoying it. And while they're there, dropping all their castings on the top surface, leaving this really beautiful, dark, rich casting material on the top surface. But in this humid weather, by having the plastic there, it does lead to very, very damp material in the bin, and I hope that that's not happening here. It is possible that we'll just end up removing the plastic if we find that the material is growing too damp for our liking. So why don't we start by trying to do an inspection along those lines to see what we see. And I believe right away I'm already seeing exactly what I had hoped I wouldn't see, is material that's just a little bit too damp. I think what we saw in the VERMIBAG Mini with the European nightcrawlers was more along the lines of what you want, which is nice crumbly stuff. But when you got material like this that's this damp and gooey, I think that's when you gotta start steering the bin towards more aeration and more drying. And I'm sure the worms love the high degree of moisture. But if we were to get to the point where we'd like to try to harvest this material, it would just be so gooey that it would be very difficult to manage. So I believe at the end, we're not going to be replacing the plastic. We're going to have to give this bin a little bit better airflow so as to let some of this moisture make its way out of the bin. I've typically not gone so far down when probing the material in the bin. But since we do have this moisture situation going on, I did want to see what's happening all the way at the bottom, because we do have a lot of moisture going on here. So I think the stirring up of the material will also help, you know, get the really damp stuff off the bottom up to the top where it has a better chance of evaporating off and drying. So as I'm making my way towards the middle, which is where we would have applied the last feeding, I'm going to be trying to pluck out any of these uncomposted items. You may have already noticed I'm combining my little collection into a pile here. We'll just put those uncomposted food items right back in when we rebuild the feeding zone. So I'm just going to collect them all into a single spot just to see what was left after 10 days since the last time this bin was fed. Definitely see a lot of moisture going on here. But I don't really see any other signs of food in here. Certain things that I'm pulling out, such as this mango seed, the corn cob. This is some other sort of a hard item, maybe another mango seed, a piece of one, breaking apart pretty nicely. These are all items that are definitely going to take you many weeks before you see them vanish in your worm bin. So you've just got to be patient with them. But all the other stuff that was placed in here as food, I don't see any signs of anything. So it is probably a good thing that we're in here to feed, because these little guys have ravaged right through whatever it is that they received last time. Offhand, I don't remember what it was. I wonder if it may have been melon, just based on the high moisture level and the fact that it's already gone. It may have been some sort of a really delicious and damp food, which you probably wouldn't expect to see many leftovers of. I'm wondering if there's anything else we might stumble on here. I don't think we're going to see much more as far as leftover food. I think all we're really going to see down here is just more damp castings and lots of worms. Here too, the African nightcrawlers are a large breed of worm, much larger than the red wigglers that are in the majority of my bins. It's always fun to work on these bins because they are the oddity in my wormery. And since they are so large, they always kind of surprise me, because I don't really expect to see such big worms when I'm composting with worms. I've grown so accustomed to seeing little itsy bitsy red wigglers in my worm bins that when I see nightcrawlers, I'm always a little bit taken aback by how large they are. And I think we've aerated the majority of the material in the bin. Just trying to take any larger chunks that are kind of clumping together and breaking them up if I can. It's also giving us a unique view of the population in this bin, because we've not really done this, I don't think. I don't think we've really gone crazy stirring this bin up like this ever. So it is nice to see so many worms populating this material, and it's no wonder the food we gave them last time has been depleted already. So I'm glad that the food that I bought down here is fairly plentiful. I believe that what remains is probably a little bit more than half of what I bought down here originally. I had this funny feeling that we would probably want to give this bin a nice hearty feeding, because I had a feeling that it was going to be pretty far along in terms of breaking down their previous portion of food that they'd received. So we've got ourselves a pretty good crevice here going all the way down to the bottom. And that's where I'm going to go ahead and place all of this reclaimed, uncomposted stuff, which I'm assuming is mainly uneaten food bits and bedding and whatnot, as well as, you know, some vermicompost too. But it was all the stuff, as I mentioned earlier, that had just been a little bit too large to slip through the sieve that I was using to screen the material. I ended up with some really nice castings from the bin that these guys occupied previously. And that was just the stuff that didn't make it through. And the other nice thing about that is that it's a little bit drier than the material that's in the bin, so hopefully it'll help draw in some moisture to help dry things out. Alright, so I'm going to just pile in what we bought down for them. They're going to get everything that didn't get fed to the European nightcrawlers. Just going to drop everything that was left in. And it's more of the same, just like we saw in the other one. We've got apple, banana, more of these noodles, cantaloupe, and maybe some other stuff I didn't really notice, but that looks like a pretty generous feeding. Or at least I hope so. And then we can start piling back in some of these old food bits that we had. One of these days I should try reviewing my old videos to see how far back these corn cobs go, just so I can get a better sense of how long it really takes for a corn cob to eventually get broken down. Because they eventually go, and these are almost at that point, because they're just practically falling apart in my hands. They're so crumbly anymore. But I'd prefer to see it broken down by the worms rather than by my hand. That would actually give us a good sense of how long it really takes. So now what else do I've got here? Let's give them some grit, because that's always useful. Help promote the breakdown of their food, as well as give them the last of the coffee that I bought down here. It seems like just the right amount. Pretty cool, pretty cool. So I've got my box of leaves down on standby, but I don't think I'm going to use them. Hopefully there's enough of a carbon element in here still to suit the needs of the worms. It does seem like a very nitrogen-rich feeding. Kind of a minimal amount of carbon has been added. So perhaps next time when we feed, we'll just use some fresh cardboard or dry leaves as bedding for their feeding. But for now, I think we're just going to leave it as is. I'm assuming that they're going to be okay. Now we're really starting to get up high in this bin. I've talked in the past about eventually moving these little guys into a different container. And I figured we would just use the capacity of this container as our trigger to move on to that point. But for now, I think we're still in good shape. Got a little bit more room left in here, maybe 1 or 2 more feedings before we sort of run out of room. So we'll just press on as is for a little while longer. And if need be, we'll get them set up with a new home and relocate them. Got a whole bunch of really nice castings here on this plastic, so why don't I see if I can return some of it to the bin. Anything that doesn't flake off now, I can flake it off more readily when it's been more dry. Whatever, anything that didn't come off there, I think we should be able to get off pretty easily in a few minutes after the stuff dries. So I'll just set it aside and deal with it a little bit later. Like I said, we're going to leave off the plastic covering for now, because I think our moisture levels are a little bit high, so we'd like to have castings that are a little bit drier. And maybe that dry material that we placed in there as bedding underneath the food will help dry things off. So we'll see. I'm hoping that that's the case. I'll be keeping my fingers crossed. So, I've got a little bit of cleaning up to do around here, but not much, luckily. But I won't take up your time with that. That's boring. Before I go, I just want to say thanks. I appreciate your company. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to give me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. Also, consider subscribing to the channel as well. That's really appreciated too. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.